So we're going to do a brief overview of shin splints and how they occur. There's actually two types of shin splints, and identifying which type of shin splint you have is important because they're from two different issues. So we have side view, back view, front view of feet, and we're just going to talk about two types of shin splints and how it affects runners. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to watch the right leg on the side view come into play. And what you're going to find is that when the foot's coming in contact with the ground's going to push back. There's a ground reaction force there. So what we'll do first is we're just going to mark the center of that ankle. And because the ground is coming in contact behind the ankle joint at the heel, what that's going to do is it's going to cause a downward thrust where the foot's going to be thrown downward, and it's actually controlled by the front of the shin. So if we look at the front view, you have the toes pulled up in the air, you're coming into the heel strike. That ground reaction force that we talked about, which is here, is going to push up behind the ankle joint, and it's going to cause a slapping motion at the front of the foot. So we'll actually just take a look at that real quick. So there's that slapping moment as you load through the foot. So we'll come back up. And as this is controlled, it's actually coming in off a muscle group that comes from the outside of the shin and comes on and grabs on here. And it's responsible, it's called the anterior tib muscle. It's responsible for holding that foot up in the air. It's activated a lot during walking, things like that. It's also a stabilizer and controls pronation. So when that toe is pulled up, you get this huge force of slapping the foot down, which is controlled by the front of the shin. Think about how the strength difference between the front of your shin and your calf. So if you're trying to move weight and you just use your foot to pull up to move something, how inefficient that is, and how much weaker it is than to push with your calf, like a heel raise kind of thing. So they're a lot weaker on the front of the leg compared to the back of the leg. So your calf is a much stronger muscle group. And what happens is when this anterior tib that's on the front is getting overloaded, either because you're a young runner or a new runner, what happens is it gets overloaded and gets inflamed at the bone, or the origin of that, which is along the outside part of the shin. So the foot contacts the ground, you get that big slapping motion. This is all controlled through here by anterior tib, and what it does, it's like tugging on a t-shirt. Okay, and what it does is it starts to inflame the bone where that starts, and the sheath around that muscle group starts to become inflamed, and then it makes it very difficult to run, and it's very painful. So as you're coming through on your stride, that big overstriding moment behind the ankle joint causes the foot to slap to the ground, which is then controlled by the front of the shin. And it's a weak muscle group. It's not meant to be doing that, and that's where a big overstride can cause shin splints on the outside part of the shin. So this is completely different than the inside part of the shin, which we're going to talk about in a minute. So we're looking at the outside part of the shin. Tenderness along there is a big sign of the shin splint to the outside, and it's controlled by the anterior tib, a lot from the overstriding. This is actually backwards. It comes off from the outside, grabs onto the inside of the foot and crosses over. It lowers that arch to the ground. So if we look at the front view and we just play through a couple, that foot is lowered to the ground through here as that muscle elongates. Because if you're a new runner or have been out of it for a while, or a young runner that's not strong enough to control this yet, it causes a huge, kind of like a slapping motion at the foot, and then it inflames the bone where that muscle originates. So that's going to be more of your anterior tib type of shin splint, but there's also another type of shin splint that is called medial tibial stress syndrome, which is a shin splint on the inside, which is a little bit tougher to treat, and we'll look at the back view a little bit for that. So from the back view, when we watch that foot come to the ground, we're going to watch the left foot come through. We'll come forward a little bit. Let's actually watch the right because it's a little bit better visualized here. So we're looking at the foot coming in contact with the ground. We're going to speed these other two up so it's the same frame. So the foot's going to come in contact with the ground. The outside border, if you look at your pair of shoes, generally the outside border is worn away, and that's for good reason. So don't be concerned about that. But what happens is the ground pushes out on the outside border of the foot. We talked about the ground reaction force before, and now we're talking about it again. So the ground reaction force is going to be at the heel and at the outside border of the foot. What that does is it causes a lowering moment, or causes the foot to start pronating. You can see here on the front view as well that the foot is turned in a little bit. So that's going to cause the foot to do this and lower to the ground here. Same thing at the back view. this type of lowering motion is what's going to occur, and that's controlled by a different muscle group. So we talked about the overstriding and the outside shin splint from the anterior tib. It's a big indication of overstriding and weakness there. But we look at the inside shin splint, medial tibial stress syndrome, is from a different muscle group and for a different reason. So we're looking at another muscle group. We're going to come through and show you where that muscle is, because it'll be easier to see it if we come through on the other side. So we'll watch the left foot come through, and the muscle arises off the inside part of your shin and comes down and grabs onto a bone in your foot that does this. So it's there, and then if we were looking here, it comes down just like this and grabs on. And we look from the front view, it does this and grabs on. So that's that muscle group. It's called posterior tibialis versus the anterior tib, which did this crossing over type of thing. So we're looking at posterior tib as it comes down and grabs onto the navicular bone in the foot, and it lowers the arch down, kind of like if you're going to lower someone off a cliff. So we look at the ground reaction force again and what that's doing to your foot. So as this comes up and contacts the foot here, it causes that flattening moment where the foot flattens to the ground, and that's controlled by the posterior tib, among other things. But what you'll find is that if you have poor control through here, and this is one of the things we look at with the Run Smart analysis, is your ability to control at the foot and ankle while loaded and running, which happens too fast to see with the naked eye a lot of the times, unless it's excessive, overly excessive. So that foot flattens to the ground. You can see the arch start to cave down there. That's all controlled, or mostly controlled, by posterior tib as it comes down. And what happens is if you can't control this and it just continues to go, it overstretches this muscle group on the inside, which causes it to tug on the bone as it tries to slow that down. But it's a lot from increased rotational forces as you run. So we'll watch coming through again, watch the foot load. We're going to watch right through here, and we're going to see that foot load down and in as the foot turns in. So there's that loading phase. Can you control it? If you can't control it, is it weakness or just poor balance as that muscle comes down, grabs onto the navicular bone in the foot and lowers that arch down? So two different types of shin splints. One is from overstriding and that anterior tib controlling that forceful thrust to the ground from the toe. The other, which is the posterior tib coming down and grabbing on through mid stance and you're running. So if we look here, this is considered mid stance as the foot comes underneath you. And if we look at what's happening here, that's what we're looking for. Can you control through mid stance? So the shin splints are two different types of things. A lot of times it's from a form issue, or it's from having weakness. It's not something that needs to be stretched out. If you think about it, it's probably too stretched out. So standing on a slant board is not what you like to do for something like this. You need to learn to control this motion, not continue to stretch it out, because chances are it's just getting overly stretched because it's not controlling that pronation phase. So this is something that's very important to know, that there's two types of shin splints. Keep your fingers out of them. Stop digging at them. That's never going to help. And then the slant board is not something that you'd be looking to use to treat this type of injury. It's about getting control and fixing form.